Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Jackson with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and her heart pounding in her chest. The South Carolina heat hit her like a wall, making her regulation uniform stick to her skin before she'd even taken 10 steps. Around her, dozens of other young recruits moved like lost sheep, all trying to look confident while secretly terrified of what lay ahead. At 19, Sarah had always been the quiet one in her family. Growing up in a small town in New Mexico, she'd spent most of her time helping her grandmother with her flower shop, learning about different plants and their meanings. Her arms and back were covered with intricate tattoos that told the story of her heritage, delicate desert flowers, hummingbirds, and symbols representing her Mexican grandmother's stories. Each tattoo had been carefully planned and held deep meaning, but she knew that in the military, they might be seen differently. The tattoos were usually hidden under long sleeves and pants, but Sarah worried constantly about what would happen when others saw them. She'd grown up hearing whispers in her hometown about girls with tattoos being trouble, being different, being something to avoid. The military felt like a fresh start, a place where maybe she could prove herself based on her actions rather than her appearance. As the recruits gathered in formation, Sarah noticed the stares already beginning. A few other recruits had caught glimpses of the colorful ink peeking out from her collar and cuffs, and she could see them whispering to each other. Her stomach twisted with familiar anxiety. "Listen up, recruits," bellowed a drill sergeant who seemed to appear from nowhere. "Welcome to Fort Jackson, where we're going to turn you from soft civilians into soldiers. You will learn discipline, respect, and what it means to serve your country." Sarah stood straighter, trying to focus on the drill sergeant's words rather than the continued stares from her fellow recruits. She joined the army to honor her late father, who had served 2 tours overseas before coming home to marry her mother and start their family. He'd always told her that the military was about character, not appearances, but looking around at the sea of mostly clean-cut faces, she wondered if he'd been right. The first week of basic training was a blur of early morning wake-ups, physical training, and learning the basics of military life. Sarah threw herself into every task with determination, excelling at physical fitness and showing natural leadership skills during group exercises. But, despite her efforts, she couldn't escape the whispers and pointed looks from some of the other recruits. It started small. Jessica Chen, a recruit from California, made comments about people who mark up their bodies during evening downtime. Marcus Webb, a football player from Texas, wondered aloud why someone would destroy themselves with permanent ink. At first, Sarah tried to ignore the comments, focusing on her training and building friendships with recruits who didn't seem to care about her tattoos. But the comments grew bolder as the days passed. During meals in the mess hall, Sarah often found herself eating alone as groups of recruits deliberately excluded her from their tables. When she'd try to join study groups for military knowledge tests, conversations would suddenly stop, and she'd be met with cold stares until she left. The breaking point came during the second week, when Sarah was assigned to a cleaning detail with Jessica, Marcus, and 2 other recruits who'd been making comments. As they scrubbed the barracks floor, Jessica couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "So, Sarah," Jessica said with fake sweetness, "how many tattoos do you actually have? Are you covered in them like some kind of walking art project?" Sarah kept scrubbing, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have several. They're meaningful to me and my family." Marcus laughed harshly. "Meaningful? What's meaningful about looking like you belong on a street corner instead of in the army?" The other recruits snickered, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. She'd heard variations of this comment her entire life, and it never stopped hurting. "They represent my heritage," Sarah said quietly, still not looking up from her work. "My grandmother's stories and our family history." "Oh, please," Jessica scoffed. "That's what everyone with tattoos says. Next you'll be telling us they're spiritual or some nonsense like that." Sarah finally looked up, her dark eyes flashing with hurt and frustration. "You don't know anything about me or my family. These tattoos honor people and traditions that are important to me." "Look, trailer trash," Marcus said, his voice turning nasty. "Maybe that stuff flies in whatever backwater town you came from, but this is the United States Army. We have standards here." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Trailer trash. It was the same insult she'd heard growing up whenever small-minded people saw her tattoos or learned about her family's modest background. Her father had died in a car accident when she was 16, leaving her mother to work 2 jobs to keep their small house. Sarah had gotten her first job at 14 to help with expenses, and every tattoo she'd gotten had been saved for over months of careful budgeting. I'm not trash, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. Could have fooled me, Jessica added. I mean, look at you. Covered in ink like some kind of gang member. Why don't you tell us what gang you were in before you came here? Sarah stood up abruptly, her cleaning supplies clattering to the floor. I've never been in a gang. I've never been in trouble with the law. I worked in my grandmother's flower shop and helped take care of my family. But, the other recruits were laughing now, feeding off each other's cruelty. Marcus stood up too, towering over Sarah's smaller frame. Sure you did, Chola, he said, using a slur that made Sarah's hands clench into fists. I bet your whole family is covered in prison tattoos, right? That's where you learned this stuff? Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over, but she refused to cry in front of them. My grandmother is a respected member of our community. She's taught Sunday school for 30 years and has never hurt anyone in her life. Then, why does her granddaughter look like a criminal? Jessica asked with mock concern. Maybe she's ashamed of what you've become. The comment about her grandmother pushed Sarah over the edge. Her abuela had been the most important person in her life after her father died, teaching her about their Mexican heritage and the meaning behind traditional symbols and flowers. Every tattoo on Sarah's body had been inspired by stories her grandmother had told her about their ancestors and the strength of the women in their family. Don't talk about my grandmother, Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. Oh, did we hit a nerve? Marcus laughed. What's wrong, gang girl? Can't handle a little truth? Sarah turned to leave, but Jessica blocked her path. Where are you going? We're not done talking to you yet. I said don't talk about my grandmother, Sarah repeated, louder this time. Or what? Marcus challenged. You'll what? Get your gang friends to come after us? Sarah pushed past Jessica, desperate to get away from their cruel laughter and hurtful words. But, as she reached the door, Marcus called after her. Hey, Martinez. Maybe you should think about getting those tattoos removed. You know, if you want to fit in with decent people. Sarah paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, she considered turning around and telling them exactly what she thought of their ignorance and cruelty. But, instead, she opened the door and walked out, leaving their laughter echoing behind her. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling while the other recruits slept. She could hear whispered conversations from nearby bunks, and she caught her name mentioned more than once. The isolation was becoming overwhelming, and she found herself questioning whether joining the army had been a mistake. She thought about her father, who had always told her that the military was a place where people from all backgrounds could come together and serve something bigger than themselves. He'd told her stories about soldiers he'd served with who came from different races, religions, and economic backgrounds, but who had become like family because they shared the same values and commitment. But the reality she was experiencing felt nothing like her father's stories. Instead of acceptance and brotherhood, she was facing the same prejudice and assumptions she'd dealt with her entire life. The tattoos that represented her family's strength and heritage were being used as evidence that she was somehow less worthy, less moral, less American than her fellow recruits. Sarah rolled onto her side and pulled her blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another day of whispered comments and deliberate exclusion. She wondered how many more days she could endure before the constant rejection broke her spirit entirely. But, as she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made herself a promise. She wouldn't quit. She wouldn't give Jessica, Marcus, and the others the satisfaction of driving her away. She would prove that their assumptions about her were wrong, even if it killed her to do it. The next morning brought a new challenge when their drill sergeant announced that they would be starting combat training. Sarah had always been athletic, but she'd never learned to fight. Growing up, her grandmother had taught her that violence was never the answer, that problems should be solved with words and understanding. But, as Sarah suited up for hand-to-hand combat training, she couldn't help but think that maybe some problems couldn't be solved with words. Maybe some people would never see past her tattoos to the person underneath. Maybe the only way to earn respect was to prove she could be just as tough as anyone else. The training began with basic techniques: how to throw a punch, how to block an attack, how to use an opponent's momentum against them. Sarah listened carefully to the instructor and practiced each movement with careful precision. She wasn't naturally aggressive, but she was determined to master every skill the army wanted to teach her. During partner exercises, Sarah found herself paired with different recruits throughout the morning. Some worked with her professionally, focusing on the techniques without comment. Others made snide remarks under their breath about her appearance or background. Sarah gritted her teeth and continued training, refusing to give them any reaction. But, when lunchtime came, Sarah found herself sitting alone again. She watched as groups of recruits laughed and shared stories about their hometowns and families. She listened to them talk about their reasons for joining the army, their hopes for the future, their fears about deployment. All the normal conversations that she wanted to be part of, but couldn't seem to break into because of the assumptions people made about her. As Sarah picked at her meal, she noticed Commander Rodriguez entering the mess hall. She'd seen him around the base but had never spoken to him directly. He was a serious-looking man in his 40s with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. Unlike some of the other officers, he seemed to actually pay attention to the recruits as individuals rather than just seeing them as a group to be trained. Commander Rodriguez walked slowly through the mess hall, stopping occasionally to chat with different groups of recruits. Sarah watched him listen patiently as nervous young soldiers asked questions about training or shared concerns about upcoming challenges. He had a way of making each person feel heard and valued, something Sarah hadn't experienced much since arriving at Fort Jackson. When he passed by Sarah's table, their eyes met briefly. Sarah expected him to keep walking like everyone else did, but, instead, Commander Rodriguez paused. His gaze seemed to linger on something, though Sarah couldn't tell what had caught his attention. "How's the training going, recruit?" he asked, his voice warm but professional. Sarah straightened in her seat, surprised to be addressed directly. "It's going well, sir. I'm learning a lot." Commander Rodriguez nodded, but Sarah noticed his eyes drift briefly to her collar, where a small portion of one tattoo was visible. Unlike the other recruits, however, his expression didn't change to one of judgment or dismissal. Instead, he seemed curious, almost thoughtful. "That's good to hear," he said. "Keep up the good work." As he walked away, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Maybe not everyone at Fort Jackson would judge her based on her appearance. Maybe there were still people who would give her a chance to prove herself based on her actions and character. But that hope was quickly crushed when Jessica Chen approached her table with Marcus Webb and several other recruits in tow. Well, Jessica said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Looks like our little gang member got some attention from the commander." "What did you tell him, Sarah? That you're here to recruit for your crew?" Marcus laughed. "Maybe she's planning to turn Fort Jackson into her own territory. Start tagging the buildings with graffiti and selling drugs to the other recruits." Sarah stood up abruptly, her tray clattering against the table. "I've never done drugs in my life, and I've never been in a gang." "Stop saying things that aren't true." "Then, explain the tattoos," Jessica demanded. "Normal people don't get covered in ink like that unless they're trying to prove something to dangerous people." "My tattoos represent my family and my heritage," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "They're not gang marks or drug symbols. They're art that tells the story of where I come from." "Yeah, right," Marcus scoffed. "And I bet your family story involves lots of crime and violence, doesn't it?" Sarah felt her temper flaring, but she forced herself to stay calm. Getting into a fight would only prove their point and potentially get her kicked out of the army. "My family story involves hard work, sacrifice, and service to others. My father served 2 tours overseas defending this country." "Sure he did," Jessica said with fake sympathy. "And, let me guess, he got those tattoos in prison too?" Sarah's vision went red with rage. She could handle insults about herself, but attacking her father's memory and service was too much. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her hands clenched into fists. But before she could do something she'd regret, a firm hand landed on her shoulder. Sarah spun around to find Commander Rodriguez standing behind her, having apparently returned after overhearing the confrontation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. The group of recruits immediately straightened up, suddenly, aware that their cruel game had attracted unwanted attention from a superior officer. "No sir," Jessica said quickly. "We were just having a discussion." Commander Rodriguez's eyes moved slowly from Jessica to Marcus to Sarah, taking in the obvious tension and Sarah's flushed face and clenched fists. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, I suggest you all finish your meals and prepare for afternoon training." And I want to remind everyone that the Army values respect and professionalism in all interactions between soldiers. As the other recruits mumbled yes, sir, and began to disperse, Commander Rodriguez turned his attention back to Sarah. "Recruit Martinez, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah's heart sank. She was sure she was about to be reprimanded for almost starting a fight in the mess hall. All her efforts to prove herself had been undone by a moment of lost temper. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, following him to a quieter corner of the mess hall. Commander Rodriguez studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. Sarah prepared herself for a lecture about military discipline and controlling her emotions under pressure. Instead, he surprised her with his first question. "Tell me about your tattoos, Recruit Martinez." Sarah stared at Commander Rodriguez in shock, completely unprepared for his question. After weeks of hiding her tattoos and enduring cruel comments about them, having an officer ask her to actually explain them felt surreal. "Sir," she asked, uncertain she'd heard him correctly. "Your tattoos," he repeated gently. "I caught a glimpse of some intricate work on your arm. I'm curious about the meaning behind them." Sarah's mind raced. This had to be a trap. Maybe he was trying to get her to admit something that would justify kicking her out of the army. She'd heard stories about military personnel being discharged for tattoos that were deemed inappropriate or excessive. They're just personal, sir," she said carefully. Commander Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your hesitation, Recruit Martinez. But I'm not asking as someone looking for a reason to discipline you. I'm asking because I recognize quality artwork when I see it, and I'm curious about the story it tells." Sarah looked around the mess hall nervously. Most of the other recruits had finished eating and left, but she could still see Jessica and Marcus lingering nearby, probably hoping to overhear whatever conversation was happening. "Could we speak somewhere more private, sir?" Sarah asked quietly. "Of course," Commander Rodriguez said, leading her out of the mess hall and toward a small office building. "My office is just over here." As they walked across the base, Sarah's mind continued to race with questions and fears. Why was Commander Rodriguez interested in her tattoos? What did he want to know? And, most importantly, was this conversation going to end with her being sent home in disgrace? Commander Rodriguez's office was neat and professional, with military commendations on the walls and family photos on his desk. He gestured for Sarah to take a seat in a chair across from his desk, then sat down himself. "Recruit Martinez," he began, "I want you to know that this conversation is completely off the record. You're not in trouble, and nothing you tell me will be used against you in any way. I'm simply curious about your story." Sarah relaxed slightly, though she remained cautious. "What would you like to know, sir?" "Let's start with why you joined the army," Commander Rodriguez said. "What brought you to Fort Jackson?" The question was easier than talking about her tattoos, so Sarah found herself opening up slightly. "My father served in the army, sir. He did 2 tours in Afghanistan before I was born. He always told me stories about the honor of serving your country and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves." "Your father sounds like a good man," Commander Rodriguez said. "Is he still serving?" Sarah's face fell. "No, sir. He died in a car accident when I was 16. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit his truck on his way home from work." "I'm sorry for your loss," Commander Rodriguez said sincerely. "That must have been incredibly difficult for you and your family." "It was," Sarah admitted. "My mother had to work 2 jobs to keep our house, and I started working part-time when I was 14 to help with expenses. But my father always told me that no matter what happened, I should remember that I come from a family of fighters. People who don't give up, even when things get hard." Commander Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah's face. "And the tattoos? Are they connected to that family history of fighters?" Sarah hesitated again, then decided to take a chance on his apparent sincerity. Slowly, she rolled up her left sleeve to reveal an intricate tattoo covering most of her forearm. The design featured a large desert flower surrounded by smaller blooms, with a hummingbird hovering nearby. Commander Rodriguez leaned forward, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the detailed artwork. "That's beautiful work," he said quietly. "What does it represent?" "This is a desert marigold," Sarah said, pointing to the central flower. My grandmother told me it represents the strength to bloom in harsh conditions, to find beauty and life even when everything around you is difficult. The smaller flowers are chamomile for peace, rosemary for remembrance, and sage for wisdom. And the hummingbird? Sarah smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks. My grandmother always said that hummingbirds represent joy and resilience. They're so small, but they can fly incredible distances and survive in challenging environments. She used to say that the women in our family are like hummingbirds, small but mighty. Commander Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Are there other tattoos that tell similar stories? Sarah rolled up her other sleeve, revealing another complex design featuring a portrait of a woman surrounded by various flowers and symbols. This is my great-grandmother, Elena. She came to the United States from Mexico in the 1940s with nothing but the clothes on her back. She worked in fields during the day and cleaned offices at night so her children could go to school and have better lives. The detail in this portrait is incredible, Commander Rodriguez said, studying the tattoo closely. This had to take many sessions to complete. 8 sessions over 6 months, Sarah confirmed. I saved up money from my job at my grandmother's flower shop to pay for it. The flowers around her portrait represent different members of our family and their stories. Sarah pointed to various elements of the design as she explained. These roses are for my grandmother, who taught me about strength and dignity. The sunflowers represent my mother, who has always been the light in our family even during dark times. And these forget-me-nots are for my father, so his memory will always be with me. Commander Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the tattoos with obvious respect and interest. Recruit Martinez, may I ask you something personal? Yes, sir. How do the other recruits treat you because of these tattoos? Sarah's expression immediately darkened, and she rolled her sleeves back down. They think I'm gang-affiliated or a criminal, sir. They call me names and exclude me from groups. They assume I'm uneducated and dangerous. I see, Commander Rodriguez said grimly. And how does that make you feel? Frustrated, sir. And hurt, Sarah admitted. These tattoos represent everything I'm proud of about my family and my heritage. But people see them and immediately assume the worst about me. Have you considered covering them up or getting them removed? Sarah's eyes flashed with emotion. No, sir. These tattoos tell the story of who I am and where I come from. Removing them would be like erasing my family's history and sacrifices. Commander Rodriguez smiled slightly. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Sarah looked confused. Sir? Recruit Martinez, would you mind if I shared something personal with you? Of course not, sir. Commander Rodriguez stood up and walked around his desk. He rolled up his own sleeve, revealing a detailed tattoo covering his right forearm. The design showed a military helicopter surrounded by names and dates. This tattoo commemorates my unit from my first deployment to Iraq, he explained. These names are the soldiers who didn't make it home. I got this tattoo so I would never forget their sacrifice, and so I would always carry a piece of them with me. Sarah stared at the tattoo in amazement. Sir, I had no idea. Most people don't, Commander Rodriguez said, rolling his sleeve back down. I keep it covered during official duties, but it's always there. Just like your family history is always part of who you are. He returned to his seat and looked directly at Sarah. Recruit Martinez, I want you to understand something. The ignorance and prejudice you're experiencing from some of the other recruits does not reflect the values of the United States Army. The military is made up of people from all backgrounds, all races, all economic levels. What matters here is not what you look like or where you come from. What matters is your character, your dedication, and your willingness to serve others. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. After weeks of rejection and cruel comments, having someone in authority validate her worth as a person was overwhelming. Thank you, sir, she managed to say. Don't thank me yet, Commander Rodriguez said with a slight smile. I'm going to ask you to do something that might be difficult. Sarah straightened in her chair. Yes, sir. Anything. I want you to continue being exactly who you are. Don't hide your tattoos out of shame, and don't let other people's ignorance change how you see yourself. But I also want you to be patient with the other recruits. Many of them come from small towns where they've never encountered anyone different from themselves. Their reactions come from fear and unfamiliarity, not necessarily from malice. I understand, sir, but it's hard to be patient when people are calling me a gang member and making assumptions about my family. I know it is, Commander Rodriguez said sympathetically. But here's what I've learned in my 20 years of military service: the best way to change people's minds is not through anger or confrontation. It's by proving them wrong through your actions and your character. How do I do that when they won't even give me a chance? Commander Rodriguez thought for a moment. Tell me, what are you best at? What skills do you have that might surprise people? Sarah considered the question. Well, I'm good with plants and flowers. I know a lot about medical herbs and natural remedies from working with my grandmother. And I'm pretty good at organizing things and solving problems. Interesting, Commander Rodriguez said. Have you considered how those skills might be useful in a military context? Sarah shook her head. Not really, sir. Field medicine often involves improvisation and knowledge of natural resources. Leadership requires organizational skills and problem-solving abilities. And understanding plants and terrain can be crucial for survival in combat situations. Sarah's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was suggesting. You think my background could actually be an advantage? I think your background gives you knowledge and perspectives that many of the other recruits don't have, Commander Rodriguez said. And I think that if you demonstrate those abilities, people will start to see you differently. But what if they don't? What if they're so convinced I'm a bad person that they refuse to see anything else? Commander Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. Then, that's their loss, not yours. Your job is not to convince everyone to like you, Recruit Martinez. Your job is to be the best soldier you can be and to prove that their assumptions about people like you are wrong. Sarah nodded slowly, beginning to feel a spark of hope for the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson. What should I do about the recruits who are actively making my life difficult? For now, continue to take the high road. Don't give them ammunition to use against you by losing your temper or responding to their provocations. But also don't be a doormat. Stand up for yourself with dignity and strength. And if that doesn't work? Commander Rodriguez's expression became more serious. If the harassment escalates or becomes threatening, you come to me immediately. I won't tolerate bullying or discrimination in my units, regardless of the reason. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time since arriving at boot camp, she felt like she had an ally, someone who understood her situation and was willing to help. Sir, can I ask why you're helping me? Why do you care about my situation? Commander Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because 25 years ago, I was a young Hispanic recruit who faced discrimination because of my last name and my background. There were people who assumed I was lazy, uneducated, and probably only joined the military to avoid prison. How did you get through it? The same way I'm asking you to get through it, he said. By proving them wrong, one day at a time. By being so good at my job that they had to respect me whether they wanted to or not. And by never forgetting that their ignorance said more about them than it did about me. Sarah nodded, feeling inspired by his story. Did it work? Did people eventually change their minds about you? Some did. Others never did, Commander Rodriguez admitted. But, eventually, it didn't matter what they thought because I had proven to myself and to the people who mattered that I belonged here. And now you're a commander. Now I'm in a position to make sure that other people don't have to face the same challenges alone, he said. Which brings me to my next point. Commander Rodriguez opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a folder. I've been reviewing performance reports from your training so far, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Sarah looked surprised. Really? Really? Your physical fitness scores are in the top 15% of your training group. Your marksmanship is excellent. Your knowledge retention during classroom sessions is outstanding. And several of your drill sergeants have noted your natural leadership abilities during group exercises. Sarah felt a surge of pride. She'd been working hard, but, with all the negative attention she'd been receiving, she hadn't realized that her efforts were being noticed by the instructors. There's more, Commander Rodriguez continued. Next week, your training group is going to participate in a field exercise that will test your survival skills, teamwork abilities, and problem-solving capabilities. I think this could be an opportunity for you to show your fellow recruits what you're really made of. What kind of field exercise? You'll be divided into small teams and dropped in a wooded area with limited supplies. Your job will be to navigate to various checkpoints, complete challenges at each location, and make it to the final rendezvous point within a specified time frame. Sarah's interest was piqued. This sounded like exactly the kind of challenge where her background knowledge might actually be useful. What kinds of challenges? I can't give you specifics, but I can tell you that teams will need to demonstrate medical knowledge, navigation skills, resource management, and leadership under pressure, Commander Rodriguez said. Does that sound like something you could excel at? Yes, sir, Sarah said with growing confidence. It does. Good. Now, I want you to understand that I'm not going to give you any special treatment or advantages. You'll have to earn your success just like everyone else. But I wanted you to know that this exercise could be a turning point for you if you approach it the right way. Sarah nodded eagerly. How should I approach it? Be yourself. Use your knowledge and skills to help your team succeed. Show leadership when appropriate, but also know when to follow. And remember that the goal is not just personal success, but team success. What if my teammates don't want to listen to me because of their preconceptions? Then, you'll have to prove yourself through your actions rather than your words, Commander Rodriguez said. But I have a feeling that when people are lost in the woods and need help, they'll be less concerned about your tattoos and more concerned about your abilities. Sarah left Commander Rodriguez's office feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks. For the first time, she felt like she had a real chance to prove herself and maybe even change some minds about who she really was. But, as she walked back toward the barracks, she encountered Jessica Chen and Marcus Webb waiting near the entrance. Well, Jessica said with a smirk. Look who got called to the principal's office. What did you do, Martinez? Finally, get caught dealing drugs? I wasn't in trouble, Sarah said calmly, trying to remember Commander Rodriguez's advice about taking the high road. Sure you weren't, Marcus laughed. That's why you were in there for an hour looking like you were about to cry. Sarah felt her temper start to rise, but she forced herself to stay calm. I was having a conversation about my training progress. Training progress? Jessica scoffed. What could they possibly say about your progress except that you don't belong here? Actually, they said I'm performing well and showing natural leadership abilities, Sarah said, immediately regretting giving them any information they could use against her. Marcus and Jessica exchanged glances, and Sarah could see them calculating how to turn this information into another attack. Leadership abilities? Marcus said mockingly. What kind of leadership? Teaching people how to join gangs? How to get prison tattoos? You know what I think? Jessica added. I think they're just being politically correct. They probably feel sorry for you and don't want to hurt your feelings by telling you the truth. Sarah took a deep breath, remembering Commander Rodriguez's words about proving people wrong through actions rather than arguments. You're entitled to your opinions, she said simply, then tried to walk past them into the barracks. But Marcus stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Hold on there, Chola. We're not done talking to you yet. The slur hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she forced herself to remain calm. Actually, we are done talking. Excuse me. I don't think so, Jessica said, moving to block Sarah's other side. See, we've been talking to some of the other recruits, and we all agree that you're bringing down the quality of our training group. People are starting to wonder if having someone like you around is going to hurt their own chances of success, Marcus added. Maybe you should consider doing everyone a favor and dropping out. Sarah felt her heart pounding, but she kept her voice steady. I'm not dropping out. I have just as much right to be here as anyone else. Do you though? Jessica asked with fake concern. I mean, look at yourself. Look at how you present yourself to the world. Is this really the image the Army wants to project? The Army wants soldiers who are dedicated, skilled, and committed to serving others, Sarah said, drawing on Commander Rodriguez's words. My appearance doesn't affect my ability to do any of those things. Marcus laughed harshly. Your appearance tells everyone exactly what kind of person you are. And that kind of person doesn't belong in the United States Army. What kind of person do you think I am? Sarah asked, genuinely curious to hear their answer. The kind who makes bad decisions, Jessica said. The kind who doesn't respect herself or her body. The kind who probably comes from a family of criminals and addicts. Sarah felt her control starting to slip. These weren't just attacks on her anymore, they were attacks on her family, her grandmother, and everything she held dear. You don't know anything about my family, she said, her voice beginning to shake with anger. We know enough, Marcus said. We know that decent families don't raise daughters who look like walking advertisements for gang membership. And we know that people like you usually drag down everyone around them, Jessica added. We're just trying to protect our fellow recruits from your influence. Sarah realized that no amount of reasoning or explanation was going to change their minds. They had decided who she was based on her appearance, and they weren't interested in any evidence to the contrary. If you'll excuse me, she said firmly, I have training to prepare for. This time, she pushed past them with enough force to make it the morning of the field exercise arrived with gray skies and a chill in the air that made Sarah pull her jacket tighter around her shoulders. She'd barely slept the night before, not from nerves about the exercise itself, but from anticipation. This was her chance to prove herself, to show her fellow recruits that their assumptions about her were wrong. As the training group assembled in the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah noticed the usual division among the recruits. Jessica Chen and Marcus Webb stood with their circle of followers, occasionally glancing her way with smirks and whispered comments. A few neutral recruits clustered together, focused on their own preparation and not particularly interested in the social dynamics. And then, there was Sarah, standing alone as usual, but for once not feeling isolated by her solitude. Drill Sergeant Thompson stepped forward with a clipboard and whistle, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. Listen up, recruits. Today you'll be divided into teams of 5 for a survival and navigation exercise. This is not a game. This is not summer camp. This is a test of your ability to work together, think under pressure, and demonstrate the skills we've been teaching you. Sarah's stomach tightened as she waited to hear the team assignments. She knew there was a good chance she'd be paired with recruits who had been making her life difficult, but she tried to stay focused on Commander Rodriguez's advice about proving herself through actions. Team Alpha, Drill Sergeant Thompson called out. Chen, Webb, Johnson, Peters, and Martinez. Sarah's heart sank. She'd been assigned to the team with Jessica and Marcus, the 2 recruits who had been most vocal about their dislike of her. She could already see the satisfaction on their faces as they realized they'd have hours to continue their harassment away from the watchful eyes of the drill sergeants. Each team will receive a map, compass, basic first aid supplies, and emergency rations for 1 day, Drill Sergeant Thompson continued. Your mission is to navigate to 3 checkpoints located throughout the training area, complete the challenges at each checkpoint, and rendezvous at the final location by 1800 hours. Teams that fail to complete all checkpoints or arrive late will face additional training requirements. The teams were given 15 minutes to organize themselves and review their materials before being transported to their starting positions. Sarah approached Team Alpha with determination, refusing to let the obvious hostility from Jessica and Marcus discourage her. All right, team, said Kevin Johnson, a quiet recruit from Ohio who generally kept to himself. We should look at this map and figure out the best route to the checkpoints. Sarah spread out the map on a nearby bench and studied the terrain features. Her years of hiking with her grandmother in the New Mexico desert had taught her to read topographic maps, and she quickly identified potential challenges and advantages along different routes. There are 3 ways we could approach this, she began, pointing to various paths on the map. We could take the main trail, which would be faster but probably more crowded with other teams. We could go cross-country through this valley, which would be shorter distance-wise but involve more climbing. Or we could take this ridge route, which would give us good visibility but expose us to weather. Jessica rolled her eyes. Great, now the gang member thinks she's a navigation expert. What's next? Are you going to tell us about all the times you've run from the police through the woods? Sarah ignored the comment and continued studying the map. Based on the terrain and the checkpoint locations, I think our best bet is to combine parts of different routes. Take the main trail to here, she pointed to a specific location, then cut cross-country to avoid this steep section, and approach the final checkpoint from the ridge. Marcus snorted. Why would we listen to navigation advice from someone who probably can't even read? Because, said Dave Peters, a soft-spoken recruit from Montana, she's right about the terrain. I grew up hunting in mountains, and that route makes the most sense. Sarah felt a flash of gratitude toward Dave, even though he'd barely spoken to her during their weeks of training. Kevin nodded in agreement. Sarah's plan sounds good. Let's use it unless someone has a better suggestion. Jessica and Marcus exchanged angry looks, clearly frustrated that their automatic dismissal of Sarah's ideas wasn't being supported by the rest of the team. Fine, Jessica said with obvious reluctance. But, when we get lost because we're following directions from someone with no real training, don't blame me. The team was transported to their starting point in the back of a military truck, bouncing along rough roads through dense forest. Sarah used the time to review the map again and identify landmarks they should watch for along their route. When they were dropped off at their starting point, Sarah immediately noticed something the others had missed. Look at those clouds, she said, pointing to the darkening sky. We're going to get rain, probably within the next 2 hours. We should adjust our route to make sure we're not crossing any low areas that might flood. Oh, please, Jessica scoffed. Now you're a meteorologist too? What other amazing skills did you learn in gang school? But Dave was looking up at the clouds with concern. She's right. Those are definitely storm clouds, and they're moving fast. We should probably stick to higher ground. Marcus glared at Dave. Why are you taking her side? You don't even know her. I'm not taking anyone's side, Dave replied calmly. I'm trying to keep our team safe and successful. If someone has useful knowledge, I don't care where it came from. The team set off through the forest, following Sarah's suggested route. Despite Jessica and Marcus's continued hostility, Sarah found herself falling into a natural leadership role as they encountered various challenges along the way. When they reached a stream crossing where the main bridge had been removed as part of the exercise, Sarah quickly identified a safer crossing point upstream. When Kevin injured his ankle on loose rocks, Sarah used knowledge from her grandmother about natural pain relief to find willow bark that could help reduce his discomfort. How did you know about that? Dave asked as Sarah prepared the willow bark. My grandmother taught me about medicinal plants, Sarah explained, carefully avoiding any details that might give Jessica and Marcus more ammunition for their attacks. Willow bark contains the same compound that's in aspirin. That's actually really cool, Dave said, watching her work. Where did your grandmother learn stuff like that? Before Sarah could answer, Marcus jumped in with his usual venom. Probably learned it in prison. I bet her whole family are drug dealers who know about plants for all the wrong reasons. Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to focus on helping Kevin rather than responding to Marcus's provocation. Dave, however, turned to face Marcus directly. Dude, what is your problem? He asked. Sarah's been nothing but helpful all morning, and you keep attacking her for no reason. No reason? Marcus laughed harshly. Look at her. She's obviously trouble. People don't get tattoos like that unless they're involved in criminal activity. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Dave shot back. My uncle has tattoos covering his entire back, and he's a firefighter who's saved dozens of lives. Tattoos don't make someone a criminal. Sarah looked up from Kevin's ankle, surprised by Dave's passionate defense of her. She'd assumed he was just being polite when he agreed with her navigation suggestions, but apparently he genuinely didn't share Jessica and Marcus's prejudices. Whatever, Jessica muttered. You'll see what she's really like when the pressure gets serious. As if summoned by her words, the first drops of rain began to fall through the forest canopy. Within minutes, the light drizzle had become a steady downpour, making the trail slippery and reducing visibility. Great, Marcus said, glaring at Sarah as if the weather was somehow her fault. Now we're going to be soaked and miserable for the rest of the day. Actually, Sarah said, pulling out the poncho from her pack, if we share resources and move quickly, we can minimize our exposure. I noticed a small shelter structure marked on the map about half a mile ahead. We can wait out the worst of the storm there. Or, Jessica said sarcastically, we could just keep moving and not waste time hiding from a little water. But, as the rain intensified and thunder began rumbling overhead, even Jessica had to admit that seeking shelter was probably the smart choice. The team made their way quickly through the increasingly muddy forest to the shelter Sarah had identified. The structure was a simple wooden lean-to, big enough for all 5 team members to huddle together out of the rain. As they waited for the storm to pass, Sarah noticed that Kevin's ankle was swelling despite the willow bark treatment. Kevin, let me take a look at that ankle again, she said, kneeling beside him. As she gently examined his foot, Sarah realized that the injury was more serious than they'd initially thought. I think you might have a minor fracture, she said. We need to immobilize it properly. With what? Jessica asked. We don't have any medical supplies except basic first aid. Sarah looked around the shelter and spotted some straight branches that had fallen nearby. We can make a splint with these branches and some strips of cloth from our extra clothing. You want to practice amateur medicine on Kevin's foot? Marcus asked incredulously. What if you make it worse? What if we do nothing and he tries to walk on a broken bone for the next 6 hours? Sarah countered. A temporary splint will provide support and prevent further injury. Dave nodded. I think Sarah's right. We need to stabilize it somehow. Sarah carefully fashioned a splint using the branches and strips of fabric, drawing on knowledge she'd gained from helping her grandmother treat injured animals at their flower shop. As she worked, she explained each step to the others, demonstrating a level of medical knowledge that surprised even herself. Where did you learn to do this? Kevin asked, watching her secure the splint with practiced efficiency. My grandmother taught me basic first aid for both people and animals, Sarah explained. She always said that in small communities, you have to be able to help your neighbors when they need it. Your grandmother sounds amazing, Dave said genuinely. I'd love to meet her someday. Sarah smiled, the first really warm smile she'd managed since arriving at Fort Jackson. She really is. She's taught me most of what I know about plants, medicine, and taking care of people. Marcus and Jessica remained silent, but Sarah could see them watching her work with grudging interest. For the first time, they were seeing her demonstrate genuine skills and knowledge rather than just defending herself against their attacks. When the rain finally stopped, the team resumed their journey toward the first checkpoint. Kevin's ankle was much more stable with the splint, and he was able to walk with minimal pain. The team made good time through the forest, with Sarah continuing to provide navigation guidance and pointing out useful landmarks. At the first checkpoint, they found Drill Sergeant Martinez waiting with their challenge instructions. Your team needs to demonstrate field medical knowledge by treating a simulated casualty, he announced, gesturing to a dummy that had been set up with various fake injuries. Who's going to take the lead on this? Kevin asked, even though he was still dealing with his own injury. Dave immediately looked at Sarah. I think our choice is obvious. Sarah's the one with medical training. Jessica started to object, but Marcus surprised everyone by cutting her off. Fine. Let's see what she can do. Sarah approached the dummy and quickly assessed the simulated injuries. There was a fake wound on the leg that required pressure bandaging, simulated burns on the arms that needed cooling and protection, and signs of shock that required elevation and warming. As she worked through the treatment protocol, Sarah explained each step to her teammates, demonstrating the reasoning behind her actions and teaching them techniques they could use in real emergencies. Pressure here to stop the bleeding, she said, showing Dave how to properly apply a bandage. Kevin, even with your ankle, you can help by talking to the casualty to keep them conscious and calm. Drill Sergeant Martinez watched the team work with obvious approval. When they finished the medical scenario successfully, he made notes on his clipboard and gave them directions to the second checkpoint. Good work, Team Alpha, he said. That was some of the best field medicine I've seen from the recruits so far. As they walked toward the second checkpoint, Dave fell into step beside Sarah. That was seriously impressive back there. You knew exactly what to do. Thanks, Sarah said, feeling more confident than she had in weeks. It felt good to actually use the things my grandmother taught me. I owe you an apology, Dave said quietly. I should have stood up to Jessica and Marcus sooner. The way they've been treating you isn't right. Sarah looked at him in surprise. You don't owe me anything. You've been the only person who's given me a fair chance. That's exactly the problem, Dave said. I've been staying neutral when I should have been actively opposing their bullying. From now on, I'm going to speak up every time they try to tear you down. Even Kevin, despite his injured ankle, had begun to see Sarah differently. I have to admit, he said as they navigated a particularly tricky section of trail, I had some doubts about you when we first started training. But seeing how you handled the medical stuff back there, and how you've been helping me with my ankle, I was wrong about you. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. After weeks of rejection and cruel assumptions, having her teammates acknowledge her abilities and character meant more than she could express. But Jessica and Marcus remained resistant to changing their opinions. They walked slightly apart from the rest of the group, occasionally making snide comments under their breath about gang medicine and jailhouse first aid. The second checkpoint presented a different kind of challenge: navigation and resource management. The team was given a series of coordinates and told to find hidden supplies while avoiding certain dangerous areas marked on their map. Sarah's map reading skills proved invaluable once again as she identified the most efficient route between coordinates and spotted potential shortcuts that other teams might miss. "There," she said, pointing to a ridge overlooking a valley. "If we climb up to that point, we can see the entire search area and plan our approach to each coordinate." "That's a lot of extra climbing," Jessica complained. "Why don't we just start with the closest coordinate and work our way around?" "Because," Sarah explained patiently, "if we get an overview of the whole area first, we can identify patterns in the coordinate placement and maybe find multiple supplies in a single trip." Dave nodded enthusiastically. "That makes sense. Sarah's been right about everything else today." Marcus grudgingly agreed, though he made it clear he wasn't happy about following Sarah's lead again. The climb to the ridge was challenging, especially for Kevin with his injured ankle, but Sarah's prediction proved correct. From their elevated position, they could see the entire search area and identify logical hiding spots for the supplies they needed to find. "Look," Sarah said, studying the terrain below. "Those coordinates aren't random. They form a pattern that follows water sources. The supplies are probably hidden near streams and springs." Her insight allowed the team to find all the required supplies quickly and efficiently, putting them ahead of schedule for the first time all day. As they prepared to leave the second checkpoint, Drill Sergeant Williams approached their group. "Excellent work, Team Alpha. Your navigation and resource management skills are exactly what we're looking for in future leaders." Sarah felt a surge of pride, not just for herself but for her entire team. Despite the personality conflicts and prejudices they'd started with, they were beginning to function as a real unit. The third and final checkpoint was still several miles away through increasingly difficult terrain. Dark clouds were gathering again, and the temperature was dropping as evening approached. Sarah knew that the final challenge would test not just their individual skills, but their ability to work together under pressure. "Okay, team," she said as they set off toward the final checkpoint. "We're doing great so far, but the hardest part is still ahead of us. We need to stick together and support each other if we're going to finish strong." Dave nodded firmly. "Sarah's right. Whatever the final challenge is, we can handle it if we work as a team." Kevin, despite his pain and fatigue, managed a determined smile. "Let's do this." But, as they walked deeper into the forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica and Marcus were planning something. They'd been too quiet during the second checkpoint, too willing to go along with her suggestions without their usual resistance. She was right to be concerned. As the team navigated a particularly dense section of forest, Marcus suddenly stopped walking. "You know what?" he said loudly. "I'm tired of pretending this is working. We've been following the directions of a gang member all day, and I think it's time we acknowledged what a mistake that's been." Jessica immediately jumped in to support him. "Marcus is right. We've been lucky so far, but we can't keep trusting someone with such obvious character flaws to make decisions for our team." Dave turned around angrily. "Are you kidding me? Sarah's been the best performer on our team all day. She saved us time, prevented injuries, and solved every challenge we've faced." "That's exactly what I'm worried about," Marcus said. "She's too good at this stuff. How does someone from a normal background know so much about surviving in the wilderness, treating injuries, and finding hidden supplies? Those aren't normal skills for a regular person to have." Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized what Marcus was implying. "You think I learned these skills from criminal activity?" "I think you learned these skills from running from the law and treating gunshot wounds," Marcus said bluntly. "And I think we'd be crazy to trust our success to someone with that kind of background." "That's insane," Kevin said, speaking up despite his exhaustion and pain. "Sarah's knowledge comes from growing up in a rural area and having a grandmother who taught her traditional skills. There's nothing criminal about any of it." "How do you know?" Jessica challenged. "How do any of us really know anything about her background except what she's told us? People lie, you know." Sarah felt the familiar weight of prejudice and assumptions settling over her like a heavy blanket. No matter what she did, no matter how well she performed, there would always be people who saw her tattoos and assumed the worst about her character and background. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. "I know," Dave said firmly, "because I've been watching her all day. I've seen how she treats people, how she approaches problems, and how she handles pressure. Those aren't the behaviors of a criminal. Those are the behaviors of someone with strong character and genuine knowledge." "I know too," Kevin added, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Sarah could have left me behind when I injured my ankle, but instead she took the time to properly treat it and make sure I could continue with the team. That's not something a selfish or dangerous person would do." Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude for her teammates' support, but she also knew that Jessica and Marcus weren't going to give up easily. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and reasonable, "I understand that my appearance makes some people uncomfortable. But we're less than 2 miles from the final checkpoint, and we're ahead of schedule. Can't we just focus on completing the mission successfully?" "No," Marcus said stubbornly. "I think we should vote on new leadership for this final challenge." "I don't want to fail because we trusted the wrong person." "Fine," Dave said angrily. "Let's vote. All in favor of keeping Sarah as our primary navigator and medical expert?" Dave immediately raised his hand, followed quickly by Kevin. After a moment of hesitation, Sarah raised her own hand. "All opposed?" Dave continued. Jessica and Marcus raised their hands, glaring defiantly at the rest of the team. 3-2, Dave announced. "Sarah stays in charge." "This is a mistake," Jessica muttered. "When we fail the final challenge because we trusted a gang member, don't say I didn't warn you." But, as the team continued toward the final checkpoint, Sarah was determined to prove Jessica wrong. She would complete this exercise successfully, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been judged unfairly based on their appearance or background. The final checkpoint emerged from the forest like a small military outpost, complete with tents, equipment stations, and several drill sergeants waiting with clipboards and serious expressions. Sarah could see other teams scattered around the area, some looking confident and energized, others appearing exhausted and demoralized. As Team Alpha approached the checkpoint, Sarah noticed Commander Rodriguez standing off to the side, observing the exercise but not directly involved in the evaluation process. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Drill Sergeant Thompson stepped forward to address the arriving team. "Team Alpha, you're the third team to arrive at the final checkpoint, which puts you ahead of schedule. Your final challenge will test everything you've learned during basic training: leadership, medical knowledge, tactical thinking, and teamwork under extreme pressure." Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate as she waited to hear what they would be asked to do. "Your scenario is as follows," Drill Sergeant Thompson continued. "Your unit has been ambushed during a patrol. You have 2 injured soldiers who need immediate medical attention, limited supplies, and enemy forces that could return at any moment. Your mission is to treat the casualties, establish a secure perimeter, and signal for extraction using only the resources available at this checkpoint." He gestured to a collection of supplies laid out on a nearby table: basic first aid materials, communication equipment, defensive barriers, and various tools. "You have 30 minutes to complete all objectives. Your performance will be evaluated on medical care, tactical decisions, resource management, and team coordination." Sarah looked around at her teammates, seeing a mixture of determination and nervousness on their faces. Even Marcus and Jessica seemed to understand that their personal conflicts had to be set aside for this critical evaluation. "Okay, team," Sarah said, taking charge naturally. "Let's assess our objectives and divide responsibilities based on our strengths." She pointed to 2 realistic training dummies that had been positioned to simulate injured soldiers. "Dave, you've got the best tactical thinking. Can you work on establishing our perimeter and planning our defensive position?" Dave nodded immediately. "On it." "Kevin, I know your ankle is hurting, but you're good with technical equipment. Can you handle the communication gear and work on signaling for extraction?" "Absolutely," Kevin replied, already moving toward the radio equipment despite his obvious discomfort. Sarah turned to Jessica and Marcus, knowing that this was her chance to either win them over or confirm their worst assumptions about her leadership abilities. "Jessica, you're organized and detail-oriented. I need you to manage our supplies and make sure we have everything we need for each task. Marcus, you're strong and quick. I need you to help me move the casualties and assist with medical treatment. For a moment, Sarah thought Marcus was going to refuse to follow her directions. But, after a glance at the watching drill sergeants, he grudgingly nodded agreement. Fine. But, if this goes wrong, it's on you. Sarah knelt beside the first casualty dummy, quickly assessing the simulated injuries. Severe bleeding from the leg, possible internal trauma, signs of shock, she called out to her team. I need pressure bandages, fluids, and something to elevate the legs. As she worked, Sarah found herself drawing on every piece of medical knowledge her grandmother had taught her, combined with the first aid training they'd received during basic training. Her hands moved with confidence and precision, applying pressure to stop bleeding, stabilizing potential fractures, and treating for shock. Marcus, I need you to hold pressure here while I work on the other casualty, she directed, guiding his hands to the correct position on the bandage. Marcus complied, and Sarah was surprised to see genuine concentration and concern on his face as he focused on following her instructions properly. The second casualty presented different challenges: head trauma, possible spinal injury, and compromised breathing. Sarah carefully immobilized the neck, cleared the airway, and established a stable recovery position. Status report, she called out to the rest of her team as she worked. Perimeter is secure, Dave reported. I've positioned barriers to provide cover from 3 directions and established fields of fire for potential enemy approach routes. Communication is established, Kevin added. I've got contact with base and am ready to call for extraction when you give the word. Supplies are organized and ready, Jessica said, though Sarah could hear the reluctance in her voice. Medical supplies here, defensive materials here, emergency equipment here. As Sarah completed the medical treatment of both casualties, she realized that they still had 15 minutes left in their time limit. Most teams would probably be content to wait out the remaining time, but Sarah saw an opportunity to exceed expectations. Team, we've completed the basic objectives, but I think we can do better, she said. Dave, can we improve our defensive position? Kevin, can you establish backup communication in case our primary radio fails? Jessica, can you prepare the casualties for transport? Why are we doing extra work? Marcus asked. We've already completed everything they asked for. Because, Sarah explained, real soldiers don't do the minimum required. They do everything possible to ensure mission success and protect their teammates. Dave was already moving to improve their defensive setup. Sarah's right. In a real combat situation, you'd use every available minute to strengthen your position. Kevin nodded agreement, working to establish alternative communication protocols. Even Jessica, despite her obvious reservations about following Sarah's leadership, began preparing the casualties for potential evacuation. But Marcus remained resistant. This is exactly what I was talking about, he said loudly enough for the evaluating drill sergeants to hear. She's showing off, trying to make the rest of us look bad by doing unnecessary work. Sarah felt a flash of anger, but she forced herself to remain calm and professional. I'm trying to ensure our team succeeds. If you don't want to participate, that's your choice, but please don't interfere with the rest of the team. Interfere? Marcus's voice rose dangerously. You're the one interfering. You've been trying to take over this team all day with your gang leader tactics. The comment was loud enough to attract attention from other teams and evaluators nearby. Sarah could see drill sergeants turning to watch their interaction, and she knew that how she handled this confrontation would determine not just her own evaluation, but the success of her entire team. Marcus, she said quietly but firmly, we can discuss our differences later. Right now, we have a mission to complete, and I need everyone focused on that objective. Don't give me orders, criminal, Marcus shot back. I don't take commands from gang members. The slur hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could feel the attention of everyone at the checkpoint focusing on their team. This was the moment that would define not just the exercise, but potentially her entire military career. But, before Sarah could respond, Dave stepped between her and Marcus, his face flushed with anger. That's enough, Dave said forcefully. Sarah has been nothing but professional and competent all day. She's probably the reason we're going to pass this exercise. If you can't handle following orders from someone who's better at this than you are, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong in the army. Kevin, despite his injured ankle, moved to stand beside Dave. Dave's right. Sarah has been the best leader our team could have asked for. Your problem isn't with her tactics or her knowledge. Your problem is with her appearance, and that's completely unprofessional." Even Jessica, who had been resistant to Sarah's leadership all day, seemed uncomfortable with Marcus's escalating aggression. "Marcus, maybe you should just focus on the exercise. We only have a few minutes left." But Marcus was beyond reason now, his frustration and prejudice boiling over into open hostility. "You're all being manipulated by someone who learned these skills in the criminal underworld. When she leads you into real danger, don't say I didn't warn you." Sarah could see Drill Sergeant Thompson approaching their group, clearly concerned about the disruption Marcus was causing. She knew that if this situation escalated further, it could result in disciplinary action for the entire team. "Marcus," she said one final time, "I'm not your enemy. I'm your teammate. We're all here for the same reason, to serve our country and become better soldiers. Please don't let your personal feelings about me hurt our team's chances of success." For a moment, Marcus seemed to waver, as if some part of him recognized the sincerity in Sarah's words. But then, his expression hardened again, and he shook his head stubbornly. "I won't follow orders from someone like you," he said flatly. Then, "Step aside," came a new voice, "and let your teammates complete their mission." Everyone turned to see Commander Rodriguez approaching their group, his expression calm but authoritative. He'd apparently been watching the situation develop and decided to intervene before it spiraled completely out of control. "Sir," Marcus began, "I was just expressing concerns about our team leadership." "What I observed," Commander Rodriguez said calmly, "was a soldier disrupting his team's mission due to personal prejudices rather than any legitimate tactical concerns." He looked around at the entire team, his gaze lingering on each member. "You have 3 minutes left in this exercise. I suggest you use them productively." Marcus opened his mouth to argue further, but something in Commander Rodriguez's expression convinced him to remain silent. He stepped back from the group, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Sarah immediately refocused on the exercise, directing her team through final preparations for extraction. Dave completed the defensive perimeter, Kevin established multiple communication channels, and Jessica organized all supplies for rapid departure. When Drill Sergeant Thompson called time, Team Alpha was the most thoroughly prepared group at the checkpoint. Their casualties were properly treated and ready for transport, their defensive position was tactically sound, and their communication protocols were redundant and reliable. "Excellent work, Team Alpha," Drill Sergeant Thompson announced. "Your medical care was thorough and professional, your tactical decisions were sound, and your resource management was exemplary." He paused, looking directly at Sarah. "Your leadership under pressure was particularly noteworthy, Recruit Martinez. You maintained focus on mission objectives despite significant distractions." Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. Despite Marcus's attempts to undermine her, the team had succeeded, and her leadership had been recognized by the evaluators. As the teams prepared to be transported back to base, Dave approached Sarah with a wide grin. "That was amazing. You were incredible out there." "We all were," Sarah replied. "We succeeded as a team." Kevin hobbled over on his improvised crutch. "Dave's right, though. You kept us focused and organized when things got chaotic. That's real leadership." Even Jessica, who had been reluctant to acknowledge Sarah's abilities, seemed grudgingly impressed. "I have to admit, you handled that whole situation better than I would have." But Marcus remained angry and isolated, glaring at Sarah as if the day's events had somehow been a personal attack on him rather than a demonstration of her competence. As they waited for transportation, Commander Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. "Well done today, Recruit Martinez," he said quietly. "You demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and character I hoped you would." "Thank you, sir. But I'm concerned about the division in our team. Marcus seems to really hate me, and I'm not sure how to fix that." Commander Rodriguez considered her words carefully. Some people's minds can be changed through patient demonstration of character and competence. Others are so committed to their prejudices that no amount of evidence will convince them they're wrong. "How do I tell the difference?" "Time and consistent behavior," Commander Rodriguez replied. "Keep being exactly who you are, professional, competent, and committed to serving others. The people whose minds can be changed will eventually see the truth. The others?" He shrugged. Their loss is the Army's gain when they inevitably disqualify themselves through their own behavior. As if to prove his point, Marcus chose that moment to storm over to where they were talking. "Sir," he said to Commander Rodriguez, "I'd like to request a transfer to a different training unit. I don't feel comfortable serving with certain elements that I believe compromise unit integrity." Commander Rodriguez studied Marcus with an expression of mild interest. "And what elements would those be, Recruit Webb?" "People with obvious criminal backgrounds and gang affiliations," Marcus said, glancing pointedly at Sarah. "I see," Commander Rodriguez said slowly. "And what evidence do you have of criminal backgrounds or gang affiliations among your fellow recruits?" Marcus gestured at Sarah's partially visible tattoos. "Just look at her, sir. Those aren't normal tattoos. Those are gang markings." Commander Rodriguez followed Marcus's gesture, studying Sarah's tattoos with apparent interest. Sarah held her breath, wondering if this was the moment when even her supporter would turn against her based on assumptions about her appearance. "Recruit Webb," Commander Rodriguez said finally, "are you familiar with traditional Mexican and Native American floral symbolism?" Marcus looked confused. "Sir?" "Because what I see on Recruit Martinez's arm appears to be a very skillfully executed representation of desert marigolds, which traditionally symbolize resilience and the ability to thrive in harsh conditions. The artistic style is consistent with traditional folk art from the American Southwest." He looked directly at Marcus. "What I don't see is any evidence of gang affiliation, criminal activity, or anything else that would be inconsistent with military service." Marcus's face flushed red. "But, sir, people don't get tattoos like that unless..." "Unless what, Recruit Webb?" Commander Rodriguez's voice remained calm but carried a warning edge. "Unless they're proud of their heritage? Unless they want to honor their family's traditions? Unless they appreciate beautiful art?" Marcus struggled to find words that wouldn't make him sound even more prejudiced than he already had. "Recruit Webb," Commander Rodriguez continued, "I'm going to give you some advice. The United States Army is made up of soldiers from every possible background, race, religion, and economic level. If you can't learn to judge your fellow soldiers based on their character and performance rather than their appearance, you're going to have a very difficult military career." He paused to let that sink in before continuing. "Your request for transfer is denied. You will remain with your current training unit and learn to work effectively with all of your teammates, regardless of their appearance or background. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Marcus mumbled, clearly humiliated by the public reprimand. "Good. Now I suggest you use the rest of your training time to focus on developing the kind of character and professionalism the Army expects from the weeks following the field exercise brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere around Fort Jackson. Word of Team Alpha's exceptional performance had spread quickly through the recruit population, and, with it came a new awareness of Sarah Martinez as something more than the quiet girl with tattoos who kept to herself. Sarah found herself experiencing something she'd never had during military training: genuine acceptance from her peers. Dave Peters had become a close friend, often seeking her advice on everything from navigation techniques to dealing with homesickness. Kevin Johnson, his ankle finally healed, had started including her in study groups and meal conversations. Even Jessica Chen had begun treating her with professional respect, though their relationship remained somewhat formal. The change was most apparent during their daily training activities. When teams were formed for exercises, Sarah was no longer the last person chosen or reluctantly accepted. Instead, she found herself being actively recruited by other recruits who had heard about her medical knowledge and leadership abilities. "Hey Sarah," called out Amanda Torres, a recruit from Texas whom Sarah had never spoken to before. "My team could really use someone with your first aid skills for today's combat training. Want to join us?" Sarah looked around the training area, still somewhat amazed by her newfound popularity. Just a month ago, she would have been grateful for any invitation to join a team. Now she had multiple groups asking for her participation. "Thanks, Amanda. I'd be happy to help," Sarah replied, gathering her equipment and heading toward Amanda's group. As they prepared for the training exercise, Amanda's curiosity got the better of her. "I heard you learned all that medical stuff from your grandmother. That's really cool. What kind of things did she teach you?" Sarah found herself smiling as she began sharing stories about her grandmother's knowledge of traditional healing plants and remedies. For the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson, she felt comfortable talking about her family and background without fear of judgment or ridicule. My abuela always said that healing comes from understanding both the science and the spirit of medicine, Sarah explained as she demonstrated proper bandaging techniques. She taught me to see plants not just as ingredients, but as allies in helping people get better. The other recruits listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about traditional healing methods and how they compared to modern medical training. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she realized she was finally experiencing the kind of camaraderie her father had described from his own military service. But not everyone was pleased with Sarah's rising status among the recruits. Marcus Webb had become increasingly isolated and bitter since the field exercise, watching Sarah's growing acceptance with obvious resentment. He'd made several more attempts to convince other recruits that Sarah was dangerous or untrustworthy, but his warnings fell on deaf ears when contrasted with their direct experience of her competence and character. "It's all an act," Marcus muttered to Jessica one evening as they watched Sarah helping a struggling recruit with map reading skills. "She's just manipulating everyone into trusting her." Jessica glanced at Marcus with visible irritation. "Give it up, Marcus." Sarah proved herself out there. "Maybe it's time you admitted you were wrong about her." "Wrong?" Marcus's voice rose dangerously. "I'm not wrong. Just because she can memorize some first aid procedures doesn't change what she is. People like that don't belong in the military." "People like what?" Jessica asked sharply. "People who work hard, help their teammates, and demonstrate natural leadership abilities? Because from where I'm sitting, those are exactly the people who should be in the military." Marcus stared at Jessica in shock. Of all his allies in criticizing Sarah, he'd counted on Jessica to remain loyal to their shared prejudices. "You too?" he asked bitterly. "She's got you fooled as well?" "She doesn't have me fooled," Jessica replied firmly. "I just learned to judge people based on their actions instead of their appearance." "You should try it sometime." As Jessica walked away to join a study group that included Sarah, Marcus felt his isolation deepen. Even his closest allies had abandoned him, leaving him alone with his anger and prejudice. The situation came to a head during a particularly challenging week of advanced combat training. The recruits were learning urban warfare techniques, including room clearing, hostage scenarios, and medical evacuation under fire. The training was intense and physically demanding, pushing everyone to their limits. During one especially realistic simulation, Sarah's team was tasked with securing a building and evacuating wounded civilians while under simulated enemy fire. Sarah found herself naturally taking point position, using her navigation skills to guide the team through the complex building layout while coordinating medical care for the casualties they encountered. "Clear left," Sarah called out as they entered a new room. 2 civilians down, both conscious but injured. "Amanda, establish security on that window." "Mike, help me assess these injuries." The team moved with practiced efficiency, each member knowing their role and trusting Sarah's leadership completely. As they worked to stabilize the simulated casualties and prepare them for evacuation, Sarah felt the same sense of purpose and belonging that she'd always imagined military service would provide. But, as they prepared to move the casualties to the evacuation point, Marcus appeared at the room's entrance. He'd been assigned to a different team for the exercise, but had apparently abandoned his own mission to confront Sarah. "This is exactly what I've been warning everyone about," he announced loudly, his voice carrying over the sounds of the simulation. "Look how easily she's taken control of this team. That's gang behavior, establishing dominance and making others follow her orders." Sarah's team members stared at Marcus in disbelief. They were in the middle of a critical training exercise, and he was disrupting their mission to voice his personal grievances. "Marcus, you're not part of this exercise," Sarah said calmly, though inside she felt her heart racing with frustration and embarrassment. "Your team needs you for their own mission." "My team can manage without me," Marcus replied dismissively. "But your team needs to understand what they're really dealing with." He gestured dramatically at Sarah. "You think you know her, but you don't see what I see. The way she manipulates people into following her, the way she always has to be in control, the way she uses her supposed skills to make herself indispensable. That's not leadership, that's gang tactics." Amanda Torres, who had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, stepped forward angrily. "Are you insane? Sarah's the best leader we've had in any exercise. She keeps us organized, makes sure everyone knows their job, and always puts the mission first." "Exactly," Marcus said triumphantly, as if Amanda had just proven his point. She's manipulating all of you into thinking she's indispensable. That's how gang leaders operate, they make their followers dependent on them. Mike Rodriguez, no relation to Commander Rodriguez but equally frustrated with Marcus's disruption, shook his head in disgust. Dude, you're projecting your own issues onto Sarah because you can't handle the fact that she's better at this than you are. Marcus's face turned red with rage. Better at what? Better at conning people? Better at hiding her criminal background? Better at pretending to be something she's not? Sarah had remained silent during the exchange, trying to maintain her composure and focus on the training mission. But Marcus's continued attacks on her character and background were becoming impossible to ignore, especially when they were disrupting her team's ability to complete their assigned tasks. Marcus, she said firmly, I understand that you have concerns about me, but this is not the time or place to discuss them. We're in the middle of a training exercise, and my team has objectives to complete. See? Marcus pointed at her accusingly. Even now, she's trying to control the situation, trying to make this about the mission instead of addressing the real issues. The real issues? Sarah's patience finally began to crack. What real issues, Marcus? The fact that I have tattoos? The fact that I'm proud of my heritage? The fact that I learned useful skills from my grandmother instead of dismissing traditional knowledge as worthless? The real issue, Marcus shot back, is that you're a fraud. You've convinced everyone that you're this innocent flower shop girl, but I know better. I know what people with tattoos like yours really are. The comment hung in the air like a physical blow, and Sarah felt something inside her finally snap. For months, she'd endured Marcus's constant attacks on her character, her family, and her background. She'd tried to take the high road, to prove herself through actions rather than words. But his persistent refusal to see her as anything other than his prejudiced assumptions had finally pushed her beyond her breaking point. You know what, Marcus? Sarah said, her voice carrying a new edge of steel. You're right about one thing. You don't know me at all. But the problem isn't that I'm hiding who I really am. The problem is that you're too narrow-minded and prejudiced to see who I really am. She stepped closer to Marcus, her eyes blazing with months of suppressed anger and frustration. You want to know about my tattoos? Fine. Let me tell you exactly what they represent. Sarah began rolling up her sleeves, revealing the full extent of her intricate artwork. The other recruits gathered around, many of them seeing the complete designs for the first time. This, Sarah said, pointing to the portrait on her left arm, is my great-grandmother Elena, who came to this country with nothing and worked multiple jobs so her children could have better lives. These flowers around her represent the strength and sacrifice of every woman in my family who fought to give me the opportunities one have today. She moved to another tattoo, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. This desert marigold represents my ability to bloom in harsh conditions, just like my grandmother taught me. These hummingbirds represent the joy and resilience that my family has maintained through poverty, discrimination, and loss. Sarah's teammates listened in fascination as she explained each element of her tattoos, revealing a complex tapestry of family history, cultural pride, and personal meaning that none of them had previously understood. And this, Sarah said, pointing to a newer tattoo on her shoulder, is a military dog tag with my father's name and service dates, because he died serving the country that you think I'm somehow betraying by existing. The revelation that Sarah's father had died while serving hit the gathered recruits like a physical blow. Even Marcus seemed momentarily stunned by the information. So when you look at my tattoos and see gang markings or criminal symbols, Sarah continued, her voice now carrying the authority of absolute conviction, what you're really seeing is your own ignorance and prejudice. You're seeing assumptions and stereotypes instead of art that represents love, family, sacrifice, and honor. She looked around at her teammates, then back at Marcus. I'm not a gang member. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a fraud or a manipulator. I'm a daughter, a granddaughter, a soldier, and a proud member of a family that has contributed to this country for generations. Sarah stepped back from Marcus, her anger transformed into something harder and more determined. I've tried to prove my worth to you through my actions, my performance, and my character. But I'm done trying to convince you that I deserve to be here. I know who I am, my teammates know who I am, and my superiors know who I am. Your opinion is irrelevant. The training area had fallen completely silent except for the distant sounds of other teams continuing their exercises. Marcus stared at Sarah with his mouth open, apparently having expected her to continue tolerating his attacks passively rather than confronting him directly. Furthermore, Sarah continued, your constant attempts to undermine team cohesion and disrupt training exercises are exactly the kind of behavior that doesn't belong in the military. If you can't learn to judge people based on their character and performance rather than their appearance, then maybe you're the one who should reconsider whether you're cut out for military service. Amanda Torres began applauding, followed quickly by the rest of Sarah's team. Even recruits from nearby areas had stopped their own activities to listen to Sarah's declaration, and many of them joined in the applause. But the sound that mattered most to Sarah came from behind her, where a slow clap echoed through the training area. She turned to see Commander Rodriguez approaching their group, his expression mixing approval with obvious pride. Outstanding speech, Recruit Martinez, he said as he reached the group. That was exactly the kind of leadership and self-advocacy we want to see from our future soldiers. He looked around at the assembled recruits, his gaze lingering on Marcus. I also want to address something that Recruit Martinez mentioned. Her father, Sergeant First Class Miguel Martinez, was indeed killed in action serving this country. He was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star for his heroism in protecting civilian lives during his final mission. Commander Rodriguez pulled a folder from his jacket and opened it to reveal official military documents. Recruit Martinez is following in her father's footsteps by choosing to serve her country, and she has demonstrated the same courage, leadership, and commitment to others that made her father a decorated soldier. He looked directly at Marcus. Any recruit who continues to question her patriotism, her character, or her right to serve alongside you will answer directly to me. Is that understood? Yes, sir, came a chorus of replies from the gathered recruits. Even Marcus managed a grudging yes, sir, though his expression remained sullen and resentful. Good, Commander Rodriguez said. Now, I believe you all have training exercises to complete. I suggest you get back to your missions. As the recruits began to disperse back to their respective tasks, Commander Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. That was well done, Recruit Martinez. You handled a difficult situation with grace and strength. Thank you, sir. I probably should have addressed it sooner instead of letting it build up like that. Commander Rodriguez shook his head. You handled it exactly right. You gave Recruit Webb multiple opportunities to change his behavior before confronting him publicly. You demonstrated patience, professionalism, and restraint. And, when you finally did speak up, you did so with dignity and facts rather than anger and personal attacks. Do you think it will make a difference with Marcus? Commander Rodriguez considered the question carefully. Honestly? Probably not. Some people are so invested in their prejudices that they'll never admit they were wrong, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. But it will make a difference with everyone else who witnessed what happened today. How so? Today, every recruit in this area saw you stand up for yourself with confidence and conviction. They heard you articulate your values and your commitment to service. They learned about your family's history of sacrifice and honor. Most importantly, they saw you demonstrate the kind of backbone and leadership that the Army values in its soldiers. Commander Rodriguez smiled slightly. Trust me, word of what happened today will spread quickly through the recruit population. By tomorrow, everyone at Fort Jackson will know exactly who Sarah Martinez really is and what she stands for. As if to prove his point, Amanda Torres approached them with obvious excitement. Sarah, that was amazing. I had no idea about your father or the meaning behind your tattoos. I feel like I understand you so much better now. Other recruits began approaching as well, many of them apologizing for not speaking up sooner against Marcus's behavior and expressing genuine interest in learning more about Sarah's background and family history. For the first time since arriving at Fort Jackson, Sarah felt truly accepted not just as a competent soldier, but as a complete person with a rich background and meaningful story to tell. But, even as she enjoyed the warmth of newfound acceptance and respect, Sarah couldn't help but notice Marcus standing alone across the training area, his isolation now complete and his bitterness deeper than ever. She felt a moment of sympathy for him, understanding that his prejudice came from fear and ignorance rather than malice. But, she also knew that she'd done everything possible to bridge the gap between them, and that his continued hostility was his choice to make. As the weeks continued and basic training moved toward its conclusion, Sarah found herself emerging as one of the natural leaders of her recruit class. Her combination of technical skills, emotional intelligence, and proven ability to perform under pressure made her a valuable asset to any team or mission. The final evaluation exercises confirmed what had become obvious to everyone except Marcus. Sarah Martinez was exactly the kind of soldier the Army needed. Her scores ranked in the top 5% of her training class, and she received commendations for leadership, medical proficiency, and teamwork. On graduation day, as Sarah stood in formation wearing her new uniform and feeling the pride of completed basic training, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The girl who had stepped off the bus months ago, worried about fitting in and hiding her tattoos, had become a confident soldier ready to serve her country with honor. Commander Rodriguez approached her after the ceremony, carrying an official-looking envelope. "Congratulations, Private Martinez. You've earned every bit of success you achieved here. Thank you, sir. For everything. Your support made all the difference. Your character and determination made the difference," he corrected. "I just made sure you had a fair chance to demonstrate them." He handed her the envelope. "This is your next assignment. You've been selected for advanced medical training at Fort Sam Houston, with a recommendation for accelerated promotion based on your performance here." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands, reading the orders that would take her to the next phase of her military career. Advanced medical training would allow her to build on the knowledge her grandmother had given her while learning cutting-edge military medicine. "Sir, this is incredible. Thank you for believing in me." "Don't thank me," Commander Rodriguez said with a smile. "Thank yourself for proving that character matters more than appearance, that heritage is something to be proud of, and that the Army is stronger when it includes soldiers from all backgrounds." As Sarah looked around at her fellow graduates, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and belonging. She'd found her place in the military not by hiding who she was, but by embracing her background and using her unique skills to serve others. The tattoos that had once made her a target for prejudice and assumptions had become symbols of her strength, her heritage, and her commitment to honoring those who came before her. She would carry their stories with her throughout her military career, just as she would carry the lessons she'd learned about standing up for herself and others. Sarah Martinez had started basic training as a quiet girl worried about fitting in. She was graduating as a confident soldier ready to make her mark on the world, her tattoos visible and her heritage proud for all to see. The commander couldn't look away from her tattoo because it told a story of strength, resilience, and honor that demanded respect. And Sarah had learned that the right people would always see that story for what it truly was, not a mark of shame, but a badge of pride.